Okay, this is 11.2, Algebra 2B, 11.2 video number 2, where we're going to talk about the normal distribution. So this is a picture of your normal distribution. So this is when you plot your data and it ends up to be a bell-shaped. These are some things that are always true about normal distribution, so you should pause the video and fill these in. It has a single peak right here in the middle, and you'll notice that single peak is your mean. Okay? It's uniform, which basically means symmetrical. So the area on this side is the same as area on this side. If I folded it in half along this mean, the two sides would land on top of each other. The middle where the mean is roughly equal to the median and the mode. So these three measures are all about the same. And we think of it as almost like a percent. So the area, this total area, is 100%. And then what we do is we divide it up into these sections. And these sections are based on standard deviation. So these SDs that you see on here represent standard deviation. So your mean goes in the middle. And then to the right is +1 standard deviation, and to the left is -1 standard deviation. So that's your lines there. And we have these percents that go in these columns. This is at the bottom of your page also, but I just wanted to mention it here. So this is saying, remember on a normal distribution we said most of your data points are in the middle. Well, if you look at how much I vary from the mean, if I'm varying ±1 standard deviation, 68% of my data is right there within ±1 standard deviation. So that's what this is showing you down here, showing you all those percents. So the two middle are 34, so this is again the mean. And this is ±1 standard deviation. So in between ±1 standard deviation, we have 68% of our data, 34 plus 34. So 68% of our data lies within 1 standard deviation of the mean. And then if we go out here, this is 1, 2 standard deviations in the positive direction and 1, 2 standard deviations in the negative direction. If you add all these up, you'd find that 95% of your data is ±2 standard deviations, or within 2 standard deviations. This is a pretty important measure. This comes up a lot. Where does 95% of your data lie? And you'll talk about ±2 standard deviations. If you go out to 3, you're going to be at 99.7% of your data. And then if you went all the way out to the tips, you'd have 100% of your data. So all your data is represented underneath that curve. So let's see what it looks like when we do it with a problem. So in this scenario, some students got some packets of candies, think M&Ms or Skittles or something like that, and they wanted to see what's the number of candies in each of these bags. What does that look like? So they did some counting on these 150 bags, and they found out that the mean was 23. Put all this data in their calculator and found out that their standard deviation was 1. So just like what we did in 11.1. So what we want to do is to put this information on our normal distribution. So in the middle is going to go your 23. So there we go. Draw your lines here. And remember, here is a 34 and here is a 34%, right? So this is +1 standard deviation. Well, standard deviation is 1 piece of candy. So if my mean is 23, plus 1 piece of candy is going to be 24. Plus 2 standard deviations is going to be 25 candies. Plus 3 standard deviations is going to be 26 candies. And remember, this percent is 13.5. This percent is 2.35. And this percent is 0.15. You do have to memorize these percents, so I suggest every time you do one of these problems, you write these percents. It will help you memorize them. So now this is minus 1 standard deviation, which in our case would be minus 1 piece of candy, minus 2 standard deviations, minus 3 standard deviations. This is 13.5%. Same thing here, 2.35, and the last one is 0.15. So once we have this, I don't like this line, I want to make it straighter. Once we have our normal distribution, we can start finding out all kinds of great information, like what percent of the packages are between 22 and 24 candies. Well, that's right here. So that would be 34%, right? This whole area, plus 34%, so that would be 68% are between 22 and 24 candies. What percent of the packages had more than 25? So here's 25, more than would be this upper tail here. So that would be 2.35% plus 0.15%, which is 2.5%. So 2.5% of the bags had 25 candies or more. What percent of the packages had no more than 22? No more means 22 or less. So here's 22, 21, and 20 would be less, so this is this entire end. So here I want to add the 0.15 plus the 2.35 plus the 13.5, and that gets me 16%. So pretty straightforward once you have your normal distribution filled out. Now this one, put a little star by this one. Notice this one does not say what percent. All of these said what percent, what percent, what percent. This one is a how many. So we're going to need to do a second step. The first step is find percent. And then the second step is going to be multiply it by, how many bags did we start with? I'm going to say multiply by our total. In our case, it's going to be 150. Oh, they have it right here, out of 150 bags. So it says how many would have fewer than 21 candies. So that's right up here. This end, that includes 2.35 and 0.15. So the percent would be, if you add those two, you get 2.5%. But I'm not done. This is important, but it's not my final answer. Because it said how many, I need to take 2.5 and multiply it by my 150. Now remember, when you do that, turn it into a decimal. So it's going to be this times 150. And then you should get 3.75. Now it doesn't make sense to have 3.75 bags, so we're going to say 4 bags had fewer than 21 candies. Between what two values does 95% of the candy bags lie? This is always plus or minus 2 standard deviations. So on our chart, here's plus or minus 1, here's plus or minus 2. So this would be between 21 and 25. Remember I told you 95 comes up a lot? There it is. Between 21 and, what was it? 25 candies. Now this is looking at percentile. 84th percentile. So we want to think how many candies would have to be in the bag for it to be in the 84th percentile. Well, we know here, if you add up all of these, well, half of this is 50, right? What's 50 plus 8 plus 34? Because this is symmetrical. So this half would be 50. Plus 34% more would be 80%, right? So 50% plus 34% would be 84%. So 84th percentile would be here, right? So that would be more than 24 pieces of candy. So any candy in this position would be in the 84th percentile. So this would be more than 24. Okay? Now, this one is your turn. So I want you to fill it out. The one thing I want to point out on this one, though, is your standard deviation is 2 worms. So it's not always going to be 1, right? You can have any kind of standard deviation. So I want to get you started because I don't want you to fill the whole thing out wrong and then have to redo it. So the mean is 15 worms. And the standard deviation is 2. So when I do 1 standard deviation, I'm going to have to say 15 plus 2 worms would be 17. And minus 1 standard deviation would be 15 worms minus 2 worms, so that would be 13. Now pause the video and complete these questions and then come back and check them. I'm not really going to go through this one, but I am going to give you the answers. Okay, you should have gotten 68% for B, 47.4% for C, 16% for D, 50% for E, 3 for 14, and this would be 3 containers. This requires some units on this. This is a word problem. And this would be 13 worms. Okay, that is the rest of 11.2.